I decided to go beyond just doing baseball previews. I decided I'd also throw in, since the NCAA basketball tournament is starting, I'll throw in my bracket predictions. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and I'll get out my bracket. And by the way, I was just reading the local paper, and it was about some upsets that could possibly happen. And some of it makes sense, some of it not so much. But you probably all remember last year how Lehigh beat Duke and USF beat Temple. So scenarios like that can play out fairly often. So these are some upset specials that I'm going to give you right now that I read about this morning in the newspaper. First of all, I can see Colorado State beating Missouri because, frankly, I think Missouri is probably a bit overrated. And South Dakota State over Michigan because Michigan hasn't been playing all that well of late, and also they could be a little bit overrated as well. Now, here's a big one. How about Belmont over Arizona? I know you're going, what? Belmont? Really? Who? But, you know, that's another one that's a possibility. Now, another possible Cinderella, don't laugh, also from the Atlantic Sun Conference, Florida Gulf Coast. Yes, that's right, I said Florida Gulf Coast. The school didn't even exist 20 years ago. They're in Fort Myers, Florida, in case you're wondering. And they actually upset Miami earlier this season. They're one of probably the biggest upset Miami had during the regular season. So I could see them possibly getting out of the first round. And here's another one. NC State over Temple. NC State is a bit of a dark horse. Temple, I'm not sure is that great of a tournament team. Remember, last year Temple lost to USF. So before I go any further, here's what I've got on my brackets. Now first we'll start with the first round. And by the way, I'll give you a little bit of a preview. I've got a lot of upsets early on, but you'll probably recognize all the names I've got in my final four because, quite frankly, what's going to happen is the upsets in the early rounds could create mismatches later on. You'll see what I mean. Now, I've got Louisville over the 16 seed round 1 winner, which I have as North Carolina A&T. And then Colorado State over Missouri. Oklahoma State I have taking down Oregon. I've got St. Louis over New Mexico State. I picked St. Mary's in the first round over Middle Tennessee, and then I think St. Mary's could actually beat Memphis. Now, let me explain my rationale there. Even though Memphis is a 6th seed, I don't think this is the same Memphis that they had under John Calipari. And also, the Conference USA is not that great of a basketball conference either. So I'm taking St. Mary's in an upset over Memphis. Now I have Michigan State over Valparaiso. Now, Valparaiso has been a Cinderella before. I just don't see them doing that again. Now, I have 7 Creighton taking down 10-seeded Cincinnati. And then Duke over Albany. Duke's a 2 and Albany's a 15. I don't think Duke is going to lose as a 2 seed this time. Then I have the 1-seeded Gonzaga taking down Southern. I have 8-seeded Pitt over Wichita State. Now here's one. You have 5th-seeded Wisconsin and 12th-seeded Ole Miss. I'm taking Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Florida in the SEC championship game. I think they could be a serious dark horse. So I'm going with the Rebels in this game. And then Kansas State versus the 13 seed. The 13 seed game which is Boise State LaSalle. I'm taking LaSalle over Boise State, and then LaSalle will advance over Kansas State. Then again, 6th-seeded Belmont over 11th-seeded Belmont over 6th-seeded Arizona. I have 3rd-seeded New Mexico over 14 Harvard. Then 7th-seeded Notre Dame over 10th-seeded Iowa State, and then 2nd-seeded Ohio State over 15th-seeded Iona. Over on the other side of the bracket, I've got Kansas over Western Kentucky. Villanova. Here's a first, by the way. Almost every year in my bracket, I pick North Carolina to at least make the Final Four, if not go all the way. This is not a good North Carolina team. North Carolina is not getting out of the first round. I have Villanova beating them. VCU will beat Akron. I've got South Dakota State over Michigan. I mentioned that before. And then I have 6th-seeded UCLA over 11th-seeded Minnesota. That could be a tight game. Minnesota's pretty good, but somehow I think UCLA might be just better enough. And then 3rd-seeded Florida over 14 Northwestern State. That'll set up a national championship rematch from a few years ago in the second round. I've got San Diego State over Oklahoma, and then Florida Gulf Coast over Georgetown. Kill me. Go ahead. Shoot me. Yes, I said Florida Gulf Coast over Georgetown. Go Ospreys. Anyway, Indiana will take down the round 1 winner, which I have as LIU Brooklyn and Madison, James Madison. Either way, it doesn't matter. Indiana will make it out of the first round. NC State, 8th seed, takes down 9th seeded Temple. And then UNLV at the 5th seed beats Cal. Syracuse and Montana. Now, this is another one I'm questioning. Syracuse hasn't been doing all that great towards the end of the season. In fact, I don't think Syracuse is that good of a team. I do see them beating Montana, however, but that could be about as far as they go. Now we have Butler over Bucknell. I have Marquette taking down Davidson. Illinois over Colorado. And then Miami over Pacific. So that's the first round. Now we move on to my second round predictions. Louisville and St. Louis. I've got Louisville winning that one. And then Michigan State and Duke. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. I've got Louisville over Colorado State. I've got St. Louis over Oklahoma State. I have Michigan State over St. Mary's. Never go against the Tom Izzo coach team. I have Duke over Creighton. Surprisingly, I think Duke might run a little bit further this year, but I still don't think they're not a top seed. I've got Gonzaga over Pitt. Ole Miss and LaSalle. Don't laugh, but again, I think Ole Miss is a dark horse. I think Ole Miss makes it into the Sweet 16. Belmont, New Mexico. I'm going with New Mexico. Notre Dame, Ohio State. I'm taking Ohio State. On the opposite side of the bracket, I've got Kansas, Villanova. I'm taking Kansas. VCU, South Dakota State. I'll take VCU. UCLA and Florida, which is a 2006, I believe, national championship rematch. I'm taking the Gators. San Diego State versus Florida Gulf Coast. Sorry, Ospreys. San Diego State is gonna make it out of the second round, so your run ends there. Indiana over NC State. UNLV beating Syracuse. Again, going back to what I said about I don't think Syracuse is all that good. I don't think they make it out of the second round. UNLV beats them. I have Marquette over Butler, and then Miami over Illinois. This could set up a potential matchup that I'll get to later. So now we go on to my third round. Louisville, St. Louis. I'm taking Louisville. Michigan State, Duke. Sorry, Coach K, you're done. Michigan State. Gonzaga, Ole Miss. Now here's where I think the Rebels' Cinderella run ends. I think that they turn into pumpkins and they lose to Gonzaga. New Mexico, Ohio State. Going with the Buckeyes. And then Kansas, VCU. I'm taking Kansas. Florida, San Diego State. I've got Florida. And then Indiana, UNLV. I'm taking Indiana. And the next game, Marquette, Miami. Now, if Indiana makes it this far, and then Marquette makes it into the Elite Eight, that would set up a matchup between Indiana and Marquette. And of course, you know, Indiana coach Tom Crean used to coach at Marquette. However, I don't see Marquette beating Miami. I've got the Hurricanes over Indiana. So now my regional finals, I've got Louisville and Michigan State. Michigan State beats Louisville. Gonzaga, Ohio State. I'm going with Ohio State. Kansas, Florida. Taking Kansas. And then Indiana, Miami. I started to say it's all about the U, but I'm sorry, I don't think it's all about the U. I think Indiana is just that much better. So we've got Michigan State, Ohio State, Kansas, and Indiana in the Final Four. In the two semifinal games, Michigan State, Ohio State. I'm taking Michigan State. And then Kansas, Indiana. I'm going with Indiana. And then in the finale, I'm taking Michigan State. That's all I got to say. And if anybody has any comments they want to post about it, what you think that the NCAA tournament will shake out, go ahead and say what you want. And I'll be back with some baseball predictions later on.